Let's get into the advisory and discuss purchasing residential and commercial property via SMSF with John Vanderpoel from Morgans, who joins me now. John, it's like you've been in my Instagram stories because I get a lot of targeted ads about this. Is this a good idea or not?
Well, I'll go with it depends. I think you've got to be really cautious when you're being contacted by real estate agents who are promoting this as a great strategy. It could be a good strategy, but what I always find they'll then put you in touch with a certain group of advisors and a certain group of bankers, and there's probably a few fees being exchanged in the background there. So I think if you want to go about purchasing either resi or commercial property through your super fund, absolutely, it's a great strategy, but probably sit down with an independent advisor and find out if it works for you and for your fund.
And so, John, just talk us through, I guess, some of the risks and implications in a strategy like this.
Yeah, no, good question. So one of the key things you've got to consider is how you're going to go about it and whether you need to borrow money. So your super fund can acquire residential property and commercial property. There are some pretty strict rules though. So if it's residential property, the super fund can't be buying it from an existing member or related party. You can't live in it if you're a member of the super fund. You can't rent it to a family member or related party. However, if it's business real property, a member of the fund can actually rent the property from the fund. So we see that often in the case of doctors and dentists are probably the best example. The biggest thing you must consider though is if you are looking to borrow, that makes it a lot more complex, and you have to consider something called the limited recourse borrowing arrangement, which is a separate instrument to hold the asset, because the self-managed super fund cannot take on debt. So you need this thing called a bare trust, which will be the holder of the asset, whilst you then look to pay down the debt over time.
John, there's been a lot of focus on SMSFs lately, particularly when you look at the collapse of some of these super funds that people had put all their savings into. What is your advice in terms of, looking at strategy here? Because it can be, I guess, not that lucrative to look at an SMSF if you don't know what you're doing, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I always get concerned when I get a call out of the blue from a potential client who's saying, oh, look, I want to set up a self-managed super fund so I can buy a property. I mean, you've got to go back to what is super there for? I mean, the sole purpose test says it is to provide benefits for the members in retirement. So there is some traps with buying just a single asset, be it a property in a super fund. And I've seen that in practice where, you've got one asset, you move into retirement, you start taking a pension, and you've got no tenants. How do you draw an income from the fund? You can't just sell a bedroom off the property. So it's fraught with danger, and certainly our friends down in Canberra are concerned about it as a strategy. There has been some talk about whether super funds should be allowed to borrow any longer for resi property, which just comes back to that wider property conversation. But it's also been a great strategy for clients who have larger funds and can really look at it from an asset allocation perspective without having to put all of their eggs into one basket. And I think that's the key. You've got to get advice, look at it from an asset allocation perspective and risk profile and go, is this for me?
John, I know you look closely at the markets as well. There's been so much worry about Nvidia, but maybe those fears were not warranted. What happens next in your view?
Yeah, look, I'm actually pretty positive on AI, and I actually put a note out to my clients just yesterday dealing with that wall of worry. I'm a bit of an Nvidia bull, but I'm also cautious. I try not to fall in love with stocks. But the one thing you can't disregard when you look at AI and planned expenditure for next year, I mean, this number blew my socks off when I saw it. $2.2 trillion US is the budgeted amount that people are looking to, or companies are looking to spend on AI next year. And I looked at that, and then I looked at Nvidia and went, I think Nvidia is going to be okay at this point because their GPUs, particularly, the Blackwells, are massively in demand. Jensen Huang, he touched on that they just selling these things like hotcakes and they can't make them quick enough. Pretty positive for 2026, the global economy in general, but also AI. Is it a bubble? Oh, look, it's certainly got some of the signs of an early stages bubble, but I don't think it's ready to burst quite yet.
And so I guess with that sort of view in mind, there's been jitters that what we're seeing similar to what we saw at the turn of the century. In your view, would you still be sort of like advising people to stay invested?
Yeah, I have. Look, I'm certainly holding a little bit more cash than I have. I mean, we've had a fantastic run from April up to now, so I have been taking some profits off the table, but I was putting a bit of money back into the market over the last couple of days. Yeah, I think you do have to stay invested. I mean, history shows us if you are sitting in cash and the market turns, as we know, it turns quick. And if you're missing that first couple of days, you just can't make that money up. If you jump back in 5 days into a recovery, you've probably missed, 10, 20% of really easy upside. So I think you've got to remain invested, but it just comes down to making quality investment decisions, looking at asset allocation wisely, investing, in a variety of things rather than just putting all your eggs in one basket. I mean, I'd certainly be worried about a client who's 100% exposed to Nvidia. They're flying at the moment, but at some point, Nvidia will probably get a reality check, as every good company does.
What about gold? I mean, we've seen those queues outside ABC bullion dissipate. One economist noted that the queue for ice cream last week in Martin Place was longer than that, but still a lot of, I guess, demand for holding that metal.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I'm a gold bull, as you know, and I've certainly been playing gold since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where Treasury bonds got weaponized. Central banks are still buying. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty about the debt situation in the United States, and people are looking at alternatives, and gold is certainly one of those alternatives that people are embracing. And I think some of the the Aussie goldies actually look really good value at the moment. We probably, just the lag effect of pricing and the cycle, there's probably some really good upside in some of those Australian producers at the moment. And then if you get the the US dollar softens off, that's probably a further tailwind for them.